Welcome to another Maamar we learned today in the Mizgaris of Project Melukat. These Maamar are being learned l'schos l'nishmas, our beloved Rosh Hashiva Cakiva Wagner. The Maamar we learned today is the Maamar of Avdi Dovid Tashim Menvav. It's a Maamar of Achashol Pesach Menvav. The pasuk is about Mashiach, therefore it's a Achashol Pesach Maamar, even though the pasuk is from the Haftarah of this week, Parshas Vayigash. It was Muga later in a Kuntris, Shabbos Parshas Vayigash Tavshim Ches, which was the first anniversary of Didan Notzach of Hetevis, when the Rebbe was Kiver al Yom Tif. The theme of our Maamar B'chlalis is like a Shmaka Maamar, easy Maamar, where you have Yosef and Yehuda, which represents the mind versus Ma'aseh B'Poel action. Tainug and Alkus versus Kabbalah Sel. Which one is greater? Which one is a higher way of experiencing Yiddishkeit, your connection to the Eibishter? And what we're going to ultimately say is today, during Galus, for whatever reason, Talmud is greater, because it has all the milas. Mashenki when Mashiach comes, and we're not going to be looking at milas anymore. It's just going to be about our relationship with Hashem. So Maisa is going to be greater. Just doing Hashem's will, Kabbalah Sel, is going to be the greater factor, because it's just going to be again about our relation with Hashem and doing it just for Him, and like an Eved, and that's Avdi Dovid. That is the Melech Aleim, which it will be when Mashiach comes. Let us get right in. It's a short Maamar, a quick share. Va'avdi Dovid Melech Aleim v'reich l'kulam. The pasuk says regarding the Geula, it's a pasuk in Cheskel, that when Mashiach comes, my servant David will be the king. V'reich l'kulam, be one roya, one shepherd upon everybody. We do a Maamar chok mochad mora an nisiderein al pasuk. It's known the Fitikab's Maamar, the Fitikab's explanation. The pasuk is that koyal Melech Mashiach nib'shem David. This pasuk is regarding Mashiach. David Malchim Mashiach. Mashiach is referred to as David as well. And what's the pasuk trying to convey? Mashiach will be the one king, the one shepherd for all Jewish people. What is it coming to Bavorin? Yiddishkeit, Yidden won't be split anymore into two kingdoms. Why? Historically speaking, in Eretz Yisrael, there are always two kings. Check out the Sefer Malachim. Malchus Beis David and Malchus Beis Yosef. There was Yisrael and Yehuda, which was David and Yosef. There was the north of Eretz Yisrael and the south of Eretz Yisrael, the 2 Shvatim and the 10 Shvatim. Shemalchus Beis David and Shevet Yehuda, Malchus Beis Yosef and Shevet Yosef, right? The kings of David were from Shevet Yehuda, the kings of Beis Yosef, or the kings of Yisrael, were from Shevet Yosef. When Mashiach will come, this pasuk is telling us, there won't be any more this division, this divide of two kings. There's going to be one king, and that king will be David, Shevet Yehuda. So the Rebbe has a simple question. The mere fact that I need to give you this assurance means, the fact that Torah has to promise me, so to speak, give this pasuk that there won't be a split among Klal Yisrael. Move on. Obviously, there's a havamina. There's room to say there will be two, and nevertheless, Torah is telling us there will only be one king among everybody. And the question is, why would I assume when Mashiach comes, Eretz Yisrael and Klal Yisrael will be split into two kings? And the Pashas, the question is, the whole story of the split of Yisrael and Yehuda seems like it was due to sin, it was a mistake, it wasn't really meant to be. The Eibishter promised David HaMelech he's going to be the king, it was just that his children sinned and therefore there was a breakaway. And the question is, when Mashiach comes, why won't we go back to our status quo and there'll be just one king? The need of assuring one king means that there is kilu more than one nation here. There's different people, different possibilities, and Torah is telling us there'll only be one. The question is, how come? Once you're telling me there's one, what's the vadoi se'ilu? Why are we so certain in this advantage that David will be the better king and he will be the one king, the one shepherd? We find seemingly advantages in Yosef as well, even over Yehuda. We know historically speaking, going all the way back to our parashas, Yosef was the king among all the brothers, Yehuda, including Yehuda, like it's explicit in the dreams. Even if you look later on in history in Eretz Yisrael, where Yosef was a king of 10 Shvatim, Yehuda was only 2. So why are we so certain and we're so sure that when Mashiach comes, the better option is there'll be only one king, and that king will be from Yehuda, not Yosef? Another question is, what does this mean practically in our Avodas Adam? Which, this is a general question. Everything we learn in Torah has to have Hayra. Torah is Miloshen Hayra, right, in instruction. But the Rebbe says, this is specifically true when talking about anything which is going to be true when Mashiach comes, because Alter Rebbe teaches us that everything that will happen in the time to come, Mashiach comes, is talui, is basically being created by us through our avodah today. So the question basically is, what is the avodah we do today which is going to create this utopia, this single kingship in the time of Geula? And he concludes with Maamar. We know that today we do the action, and when Mashiach comes, we get the schar. And the Alter Rebbe tells us in Perek Lamed Vav Tanya that the schar mischar neida mahusa. It's not just a random payoff, but it's actually the paytus. It's actually the results of our work. So the next Oyster Rebbe is going to tell us what's Yehuda, what's Yosef, and based on that, let's try to figure out which one's greater and which one will be the dominant factor when Mashiach comes. So, to understand the difference in Yosef and Yehuda, let's look at the names. Yosef and Yehuda Atzmam. Yehuda b'lashon Eidah. What does Yehuda mean? Literally thanks, but also admission, to be moida. Yosef b'lashon Hisafik. Yosef is Hisafik, which means to add, like it, to multiply, and that is in the Psukim, right? What are the Psukim? When Leah gives Yehuda his name, she says, Hapam oides Hashem, I'm thanking Hashem. Thanks is the concept of also being moida, that is a higher power, and that's the one who gave me this child, therefore I'm thanking. It's Haidah. Yosef, Rachel gives the name because Yosef, she wants the Eibusher to give me another child. So again, you see that their names were given because of this concept, admission versus Hisafah. Now, what's the difference in a person's koiches hanefesh and a person's attributes? Koiches hanefesh and a person's character traits. The difference between a person's ability to do action versus seichel versus a person's intellect. Which part of a person is connected to admission? Rebbe says this is in all human beings, and especially Jewish people. What part of you is the part of you which is shaykh to haidah, to admission? The answer is action. How come? For a person to be able to do something with action, every action precedes a certain haidah, a certain admission. How come? What does haidah mean? Haidah means I admit. What does it mean I admit? I admit there's something greater than me, something higher than me, something I don't grasp, I don't understand. Nevertheless, it's true, and I'm going to, so to speak, play along, yeah, even though I don't understand it. That's haidah in general, that's admitting. The Rebbe says this concept of admitting exists within the attribute of action. How come? Anytime a person does an action, in truth, what's going on over here is he needs to go away from the realm of seichel, go away from the intellectual world where a person would love to hang out. Right? That's his. That's where the human shines. That's where the uniqueness of the person is, when he's able to be emotional, intellectual. When you need to do an action, that's being moida, that's going away from seichel. Like the Rebbe already said this, you read this descent by every human being, especially a Jew. You read a little bit on mikta. It's a huge rida. You need to literally force yourself, similar to like a great professor who needs to take out the garbage, right? He would love to be lost in his seichel, elamai, that certain things are necessary to be done, so he's going to force himself to do it as well. And that be'emes is happening every time a person does an action. Your seichel, all your heiche, reiche, koiches are pausing, and you're going to do a simple action that, like the Rebbe is going to say later, even an animal could do, even a machine could do, right? These are things that doesn't really express the greatness and the highness of a human being. And now that Rebbe brings an example of this concept of kfiyah, it needs to be forced. Like we know, the neshama coming down lamata is a similar concept. It's leaving its comfort zone. He's leaving the place where it can express itself, like a human being who's leaving the world of seichel. Therefore, it needs to be forceful, like the Maamar says, you're living against your will. That all is Yehuda, Haidah, Koyach HaMaiseh. When a person needs to put aside the seichel, the things that, really express the superiority of a human being, and needs to go do simple actions, Haidah. However, in Hisafah is a point opposite. Why? Hisafah means not just I understand why I'm doing this, but on the contrary, I'm going to increase, I'm going to add it, I'm going to multiply it. Befrat a real Hisafah is when it's always moisif, one after the other. True wisdom and true seichel is always growing, always exploring and finding new things. That's bina, which is always, it's like a river which is constantly rushing, right? When you open up your mind to just think and explore and always discover new ideas, It's always adding. Your seichel is always giving birth to new ideas, new concepts. That's really the purpose why a person has a discussion in Torah, when you always want to add and find new things, new depth. Move on. Obviously, this is not something I need to force myself. On the contrary, this is the opposite of forcing. This is something that I experience. I love it. This really brings out who I am. Why? Because human beings, and especially Jewish people, seichel is something that makes sense to you. Seichel is something you don't need to force yourself to do. This is all human beings, especially Jewish people. And maybe you can say why the Rebbe is always bringing out. It's already the third time that Rebbe is saying all human beings, but even but especially Jewish people. Maybe according to this Geshmak Sikh, where the Rebbe talks about Chaviv Aron Sheniv B'Tzelem Mechilek Tzvav, where the Rebbe says that Jewish people have the real concept of seichel because they have an nefshel kiss, so they're truly objective. But the course of art is every human being obviously has seichel, but a yid who has Torah, as a lakus, has something that's higher than seichel, so his seichel is more objective. Therefore, a yid could really understand seichel. But the bottom line over here is Yehuda is koyach hamaisa, and Yosef is koyach of seichel. Ois Gimel, that Rebbe is going to tell us, okay, where do we find these concepts in Avodas Hashem? In general, Yiddishkeit is split into two. You have the intellectual, the rational, the philosophy, so to speak, of Yiddishkeit Torah. Then you have the practical side, the mitzvahs, and every Yid has these two Avodas. What's Torah? Torah is one with Hashem. When a person learns Torah, he's becoming one with the Eibishter in a very eternal, a very pnimistic oifen. Like the Alter Rebbe tells us, there's no two things in this entire universe that could ever be misached, that could ever become one the way that a Yid becomes one with Torah. Like it says, the seichel wraps around the brain, and the brain wraps around the seichel. You become occupied in it. You start seeing the world this way. In other words, seichel is you. You are seichel, and therefore, when you connect to the Eibishter and the Eibishter seichel, it's a deep, deep connection. The fact that especially you can reach the essence of every world, the essence of everything, basically every world that you're learning Torah in, pshat, you can get down to the bottom of it. And obviously the Rebbe is going to say this is a murdik, a tainug. Move on. Because you reach this height, obviously it's very enjoyable. That's all Torah. Mitzvahs, you have to do, it's actions. In addition, you're doing things with things that are outside of you. You're not getting lost in your deepest, highest self. No, you're reducing yourself, so to speak, to literally do physical objects, physical actions with physical objects. Things are outside of him. The polar opposite of your seichel and your midas, which is the deepest inner side of yourself. For a person to do this, he needs to admit, he needs to say, listen, I don't know exactly why I'm doing this, but this is what the Eibishter wants, and therefore I'm doing it. You have to go down from your level, you have to go again from a high roof to a low ditch, a low valley. It means to leave the great, deep koyach of seichel and moichin and go down into the koyach hasiyah, the action. And this is literally the lowest aspect of the human, is when I'm putting away the high quality human and just doing actions. The Rebbe is going to be masber here. Is literally that one thing that we share in common with animals. Animals can also do actions. And in our language, maybe we understand better like machinery and robots. And we really don't need a human being to do actions. Nevertheless, a person does it. Why? You have to force yourself, but you do it for the Eibishter. Now the Rebbe is going to conclude connecting Siv Beis and Gimel, where you have the Geshmak and you have Torah, you have the Kabbalah Sale and you have mitzvahs. Which part of a person learns Torah? According to Torah, you need to have a chayz, you have to have a Geshmak, you have to have a tainug, enjoyment. Why? Because again, it's that hisafa, it's that seichel part of you. Kiyama mitzvahs, ikra the Kabbalah Sale lafke. Why? How do we do mitzvahs? Through Kabbalah Sale, and the Rebbe is going to connect it to literally oil is a yoke. The real term yoke comes from an animal when an animal plows. So we're literally borrowing the term yoke from an animal to express this concept of maisa, basically saying that maisa is something that is degrading, right? It's reducing yourself to literally something that any animal or any machine can do. These are the two concepts of Yosef, Yehuda, Torah, mitzvahs, the concept of always adding in seichel, and the concept of putting that all aside and just doing the actions because that's what Hashem wants. Now the Rebbe is going to ask, okay, which one is greater? Now, if you're going to think about it, obviously Torah is greater. We just explained, right? Koach HaMaisa is much lower. But here now we're Siv, the going to add the Be'emes is a Maila in each. It's the first time we're going to mention, Taka, what is the Maila in Koach HaMaisa. So, V'hinei, basically, find out Mrs. Talmud and Maisa Yishakav Tari B'Gemara. It's a whole conversation, whole discussion here. Mimem Gadol, what's greater? Kamuv B'Maimer Sham, like the Friedrich Maamar does bring. The Fligu Bazeh Chadam or Talmud Gadol. One of Maamar says Talmud, learning, studying is greater. Chadam or Maisa Gadol. One says action, activism is greater. Lashon Gemara move on. If you learn the Gemara, come to us. When you're just comparing the advantages of each, we never really conclude which one's greater. Obviously, the greatness of Talmud we already explained at length, the tainug, the enjoyment. There's also an advantage in action. What's the advantage? In iskafia. What does iskafia mean? If to break yourself, to go against your nature. It's a chiddush, it's a novelty, it's something that, in other words, the fact that you're able to go against your time, teva that I was going to explain, the fact that a human being can do something that's against your nature and against your pleasure is a chiddush. I know. It's very interesting. Even if this wasn't something the Eibusha told you to do, which is obviously a great maila, we said, what was the chisaron of maisa? The chisaron of maisa was you're reduced to an animal. An animal could also do maisa. But if you think about it, you're not an animal. You're a bar seichel, which is putting away a seichel to do action. In other words, you're going against your nature, and that's something an animal can't do. So when you do what the animal does, you're a human being that's doing that, and therefore, even a guy who has control on him, right, self-control, and puts away all of his great philosophies to do whatever has to be done, that's already a beautiful thing. That's a maila. So what's the bottom line? What's the maskana? Is it greater to express, the human by getting involved in moichin and geshmak and tainig, or is it greater to put that all aside and control and express self-control, something that only a human can do? Which of these mailas are greater? And the Gemara concludes, Talmud Gadol, Talmud Mevilde Maise. Learning ultimately overrides because Talmud Mevilde Maise. Why? Because Talmud brings to Maise. Talmud brings to action. If you don't learn, you don't know what to do. So ultimately, if you have a choice, one or the other, sit and study, because the studying is ultimately going to bring you to do what you have to do. When you're educated, we know what to do. Zokter. So this is just going back to what the Rebbe said earlier. Again, we never conclude that one of them is actually greater, that Talmud Tainug is better than Maisa. No, because Talmud includes both. So if you're looking for the advantages, if you have one which includes both advantages, obviously that's the greater one. Because it brings ultimately to Maisa. If I want to know what to do, I need to first study. Now the Rebbe is going to add, not just that Talmud brings me to Maisa, but even more than that, Talmud actually has the Maila of Maisa. You can push yourself as well. Why? After you learn Torah completely, mitzad your tainu, your enjoyment, your chayvus hanor, and you're exploring, and you're expressing yourself in the greatest way, and your simcha, and your enjoyment, and your presence, you're in there, you're enjoying it, you're loving it. A person can still reach a higher level in Torah. A person ultimately recognizes that that's not Torah. Torah is greater than this. I can't truly understand Torah, and therefore there's an aspect of also. The Gemara says Talmud Mevilde Maisa, but in Tifra Geret, Talmud has kfiyah in it as well. So if you're looking for which one is greater, obviously Talmud is greater because Talmud has both. You have the human being there, as well as you have the ability to override your natural instincts and what you naturally gravitate towards, and you could, express Kabbalah sale as well. Dr. Eben here, and they say, ultimately, that's all the way they pass it now, in our time. Kol zeh, what happens when zeh? Avalasid love, Maisa Gadol Mashiach comes, the halach is going to change. All of a sudden, we're going to see how Maisa is really great. How come? How could it be? L'chayra, Talmud already has both. Mashiach comes, our action is going to be for a very different reason. Now, in Galus, we're obviously doing a lot of mitzvahs because we have to get rid of a lot of klippa and a lot of dirt that was created through the chetzadas and in general sin. But that's not going to be the purpose of doing actions when Mashiach comes. The whole purpose of serving the Eibusher then is only going to be Rak Ba'aliyas Michael L'choil B'tei V'atzim Kedusha Gufa. Within Kedusha, we're going to be growing and growing. And if you're working your way up What's the greatest ilu, the greatest tainug? Not the greatest tainug. The greatest avodah is when you get even higher than tainug. So again, you're working your way up. The highest part of the human is his pleasure, his tainug, like we said. Higher than that is higher than yourself. So your greatest maila is tainug, but what's above yourself? That's already avodah Hashem tech kabal sale. Kabal sale is already not me. So my greatest shleimus is tainug, but above myself is already the Eibusher, that's kabal sale. Lamaler Shekadosh Baruch Hu, just to do the Eibusher's will. So that's the first nekuda. In other words, higher than any maila is the Eibusher, and that's kabal sale. Another nekuda. Ultimately, today we're in a certain system here, certain limitations of kedusha. Therefore, yeshnum gdarim shel mailis. There is gdarim, there's definitions. Certain things are higher, certain things are lower, and therefore, when evaluating the different mailis, the different advantages, obviously Talmud has the mailis. So therefore, I say it's a mile in one, a mile in the other. Talmud has both. Mashiach comes, it's going to be a whole different language. The Yitzia, we're leaving all limitation, leaving all definition. So then it's not anymore about what's greater. It's all about the essence. We're trying to reach that higher thing that we spoke about called Kabal Sale. So earlier when we said Talmud has both milas. Talmud has a mila of learning, and it also has the mila of Kabal Sale, beautiful. But what Kabbalah sale are we talking about over there? We're talking about your Kabbalah sale. You have the advantage called self-control. You have the advantage called getting involved in seichel. That's beautiful. That works for Galus. And that's the greatest mile. Therefore, in Galus, when it's versus Talmud versus Maisa, in the Galus of Talmud versus Maisa, obviously, the advantages are stocked up for Talmud. Shenke, when Gula comes, we're not looking for milas anymore. We're not looking for advantage. We're looking for something else. We're looking for the human being to be higher than himself, to lose himself into something bigger, to the Eibishter. Therefore, the only thing that matters here is Kabal Silk. We're not looking for Maisa, we're just looking for the Eibusher. And again, it's a higher type of Kabal Sale. It's a Kabal Sale, which is not expressing my self-control anymore. It's Kabal Sale, which is just about doing Hashem's will. We even have a yisoid for this in Nigla de Torah. The Rambam writes in Hilchos Tshuva that the completion of a person's avodah is avodah of Ava, just love for Hashem. In other words, not even anything I'm going to gain, right? Lishma 100%, and that's the mile of Avraham Avinu that called the Eibusher Oyavoy. He was literally doing it just as a friend, just because this is what Hashem wants him doing it. I knew avodah b'lishum pniyas with no ulterior motive, but not even that I'm going to gain Elam Haba, which is obviously a very spiritual concept, a very holy concept. Like the Rebbe is going to explain soon, Elam Haba is the Eden of Torah, where you could really lose yourself in the Eibusher's reality, but that's ultimately self-serving, it's ultimately for yourself. The greatest mile is when a person can serve the Eibusher just for the Eibusher. Shleim is a to last love Mashiach. So this Shleim is the Rambam's talking about, Avram's Shleim is that will be when Mashiach comes, in the whole world, in all of us. Therefore, all of a sudden, Maisa has an advantage. Maisa is greater. Why? All of a sudden, we're valuing things that are above the person. Anything which doesn't have any self left to it, that's what's valued when Mashiach comes. Because we're looking to negate the human. We're looking for the human to become part of something so much bigger. But what's the Rambam basically saying? What's the Rambam being meramis when he says avodah not even for Elam Haba? What's the difference between Elam Haba and any other schar? But the answer is in Elam Haba, in not Torah. So again, it's Torah, which is Tainu, which is Yosef, which is the greatest, highest mila of the person. Nevertheless, avodah b'shleimus yilamayla mizeh, real avodah is even higher than that, because real avodah is not when you're complete, but it's when you're part of something bigger. Vav. Now we're going to understand, going back to already answering our question, the pasuk says, Dovid the Eved, Dovid the servant will be the king for all Jewish people. Let's chat. And why, again, we asked earlier, why are there two mamlechas? Even when Mashiach comes, there's a to be two different kingdoms, and nevertheless David will rule. For all of them, there's not going to be any more two divided kingdoms. Very simple. When Mashiach comes, there'll still be two mamlechas. There'll still going to be Yosef Yehuda. On the contrary, it'll be the completion of Yosef Yehuda. He's still going to have Torah. He's still going to have mitzvahs. Torah will be in its greatest possible way. We're not going to have any distractions. We're not going to have to do business. The Goyim will do everything for us. Therefore, Eisek Torah will literally be our full-time occupation. So you would assume Torah will be the greatest thing when Mashiach comes, because we're going to be able to experience Torah in the greatest way. And that's why the pasuk is coming to Mechadesh. Nevertheless, Avdi Dovid Melech Aleim. No, my servant Dovid will be the king. Maise Gadol. First of all, Dovid is Yehuda, which is Hoida, but the Rebbe says even more than that. First of all, everything will be Maise and Kviya. Not just that you're going to learn Torah in a way that you're going to know that it's higher. Your Torah won't be you experiencing anything anymore. Your Torah is just going to be an expression of the Eibishter. And higher than any limitations, any self. It's not going to be the highest, greatest version of yourself, but it's going to be above yourself. Therefore the pasuk says, Avdi, my servant, my Eved. Eved Nemon. Tachlis Hashleim is Eved Nemon is an Eved, but at the same time he also feels and loves and experiences the Adin because he is one with the Adin, which is the deepest essence of the Neshama, which is literally one with Hashem. Therefore, at the same time, you're able to experience Torah, you're able to experience the Tainug, but it's not a stira to being one with Hashem because it's Yachid. You are one with Hashem. Therefore, there's no ulterior motives. There's just the Eibishter. There's just the Yichidush HaBenefesh. But that ultimately is going to encompass everything, including the Torah. Therefore, the Torah is going to be in its most complete fashion. To the extent that Rebbe says, I'm already going to go here. Not just is there not going to be, is Maisa greater than Torah, not just is Maisa Gadol, but when Mashiach comes, it's not going to be Maisa and Talmud anymore. The pasuk before that says, bring the two sticks together and you make them one. We're taking Yehuda and Yosef, we're making them one. How come? Yehuda is not Yehuda, Yosef is not Yosef. There's no Maisa, there's no Talmud, it's all Bittul, it's all the Eibishter, it's all Yachid, it's all Yichida. So your action is not greater because it has the Maila of self-control. Your Torah is not greater because it's Tainug, it's the greatest expression of yourself. No. Sayir Torah, Sayir Mitzvahs, everything is just a isbatus of the Yichida, of the Eved Nemon, that a Yid is one with the Eibishter, therefore whatever the Eibishter wants, the Eibishter needs, I'm here, but at the same time I experience it too because this is the greatest expression of myself as well, because it's Yichida. Zayin. The last and final question we asked is, what does this mean today? How do we create that reality during Golus? Right? The Alter Rebbe tells us, that we today are creating all the Giluyim of Mashiach. This concept, Mashiach comes, there'll be a utopia. There'll be one king, Dovid Avdi. That's through our Aveda today. Now, what Aveda today do we do which prepares for this time? First of all, obviously every person begins his avodah with ulterior motives. You can't start lishma, l'shalei lishma. When a person serves the Eibishter, shalei lishma, eventually he'll reach a place where he'll only serve for spiritual gain, for elam haba. But eventually he'll actually going to reach lishma, 100% lishma. In other words, already today we find that there's avodah called kabbalah sale. And then there's a higher avodah called Tainug, Elam Haba, but ultimately the goal is Lishma, 100% Lishma, just for the Eibishter. Avodah is Avraham Avinu. That the Eibishter calls him my beloved one. Now, the fact that the Rambam already paskins this as halacha means it's obligated and it's expected from every single Yid. The Eibishter obviously only expects something if we have the ability to do it. The Yeshna, every Yid has the ability, has the strength to reach real Lishma, which is similar to the Geula, Dika Lishma, when again, it's not about my completion, it's not even about my Kabbalah Sil, my self-control, but it's something completely different. Now that I was going to tell us in this in Ambam, you see already Merumez, connection to the Geula, that it's really not something that's connected to our time, it's just our time as a preparation. Why? It's in the 10th perek of Hilchos Tshuva, and both of those concepts connect to the Geula. To do it in that Tshuva, the Chidush of Mashiach is Tshuva, when we're going to elevate. Again, we're not going to be tzaddikim anymore. We're going to elevate and utilize all the energy of everything. Even tzaddikim, who until this point were just like Mamayla Giluyim, are also going to be Bali Tshuva. They're also going to, so to speak, elevate the world. That's the whole Chidush of Geula. He said, move on. When a person has the Perek Asiri, when a person has a completion, Eser is completed, it's a complete number, 10 Sfiras. So when you have Perek Asiri of Hilchos Tshuva, when you have a complete Avodah of Lishma, that's when you'll reach the Tshuva. Ches. Yiratzin shekein yeh b'meinu mamish. Rebbe says Yiratzin should be in our time, may be God's will, should be speedily. Sheikuyim ayiyud the kimala arz esashek mayim l'chasim. We should fulfill the vow of the Eibishter of the Siyum of Rambam. Also happens to be that the world will be flooded and be completed with the day of Hashem mayim l'chasim. The Rebbe says here, you see in the same pasuk both concepts. First of all, not just like the Rambam says before, that we'll be able to grasp the Eibishter of V'keach Adam, which is, again, the greatest mile in Tainug in Yosef. Like the Alter Rebbe says, it's the greatest type of connection. More than that, what does Kamayim L'Chasam mean? The world is covered, it's engulfed completely in the Eibishter's knowledge. It's like water, where it's Alma discussed, there's no reality outside of Hashem, there's no identity of the world, there's no self, it's just Kamayim L'Chasim, everything is the knowledge of Hashem. As well, the vow will be filled, the Eibishter's rulership, the Eibishter's kingship will be recognized and seen in the entire world. And specifically among the Jewish people who are his close nation, every Yid will be a Ben Yochid, which again we explained Yochid is Yechida, it's the chelik of a Yid, which is literally one with the Eibishter. And also the conclusion of the pasuk will be fulfilled, that the Eibishter will be the king, and that day it will be proclaimed and announced that the Eibishter is Echad U'Shmai Echad. Today, there's the way the Eibishter is written, the way the Eibishter is expressed and seen, which is two different levels, because we don't have the full picture. The Shem HaEtzem that we don't have today, the essential name, which isn't ever mentioned, will be Nizgale. Will have the absolute oneness, the way it is in Shemai, the way it's Lamayla, the way we don't experience it today, that will be Bizgalos, Pshitos, the Lamayla, Pshitos, Adam Pashal Mata, that's all connected to the Pshitos of a Yid, the Yechida of a Yid, which will be speedily, with the complete, ultimate Geula, may be speedily through Mashiach Tzidkenu. So what's the Nikuda? What did Rebbe basically tell us in our Maamar? When Mashiach comes, there's obviously going to be Torah and mitzvahs, but ultimately, it's not going to be about mindless anymore. Today, there's a whole shayla. What's greater? Me using my mind or me practicing my self-control, right? Is it Talmud, is it Ma'is? And everyone has its mila. There's a Safa, there's Yehuda, right? When Mashiach comes, it's not going to be anymore about me. It's not going to be about me experiencing the greatest Tainug in Hashem. It's not going to be me experiencing self-control, Kayach HaMaiseh, right? It's going to be Pashit, losing ourselves to something bigger than ourselves, the Eibishter, Kamayim L'Chasim. It may be speedily in our time. Again, this all happens through the avodah today of the Shema, like the Rambam tells us. Have a wonderful day.